With Dragon Age the Velgard just around the corner, I decided to start a new lore series centered around the Dragon Age franchise. This video series is designed to introduce newcomers to the key races, locations, and lore for Bioware's dark fantasy. It has, however, been 10 years since the last Dragon Age game, so for those of you familiar with Dragon Age but your memory is a bit hazy, we are all 10 years older after all, this will hopefully serve as a refresher. In today's video, we are going to explore one of the key races in the series, the Elves. With figures like Solus, ghilan'nain, and elgar'nan set to appear in Velgard, an understanding of the Elves, their history, culture, and religion will be key into understanding the stakes and motivations of these characters. Let's kick off by exploring their history. The earliest records of dalish keepers and dwarven shaperet speak of a Thedas entirely devoid of humans, where the elves reigned over the land and the dwarves ruled the underground. The elves, or Elven as they were known, an elvish term meaning the people, populated most of Thedas, part of a great civilization known as Elvenan, meaning place of the people. It covered most of Thedas from the great ancient city of Alathan, created in 7600 Ancient, to Ferelden, Orlais, and the lands west of Orlais. It is said that the ancient elves were once immortal beings. They lived in harmony with nature and existed in a world without the veil and called the Fade the sky. Although they could be injured and die, they did not age or wither in both mind or body. Based on a few ancient works depicting cooperation between the elves and dwarfs, it is believed that they lived in relative peace and harmony, trading freely between their two kingdoms. While the dwarfs flourished underground, building their taigs and mining lyrium, the elves built multiple cities, though most Dalish stories focus on their grand capital Alathan, located in the Great Forest in northern Thedas that bears the same name. Alathan was said to be a place where the best of the ancient elves would go to trade knowledge, greet old friends, and settle millennia-old disputes, with homes, galleries, and amphitheatres that stood for ages. It was the pinnacle of elven civilization and a beacon of their art, culture, and knowledge. Solus's own accounts of Alathan speak of spires of crystal twining through the branches, palaces floating among the clouds. Imagine beings who lived forever, for whom magic was as natural as breathing. This golden age, sadly, was not to last. Around minus 3000 Ancient, humans first appeared in Thedas, and their appearance marked the beginning of the end for the elves. They arrived from the north as a single tribe known as the Neromians. The underground ruins in the Brazilian forest, built by humans but containing elven elements, suggest that their initial interactions were positive, with both races trading peacefully. The elves named the humans Shemlin, or quicklings, for their short lifespan, and viewed them as a brash, warlike, and impatient race. Over time, relations soured after the elves contracted many human diseases, some of which proved fatal. Around this time, they also began to experience the quickening and began to age and die. The elves blamed their contact with the humans for the loss of their immortality, and in fear began to withdraw, distancing themselves from these dangerous Shemlin and retreating to their own lands in self-preservation. Unfortunately, an unforeseen consequence of this decision was that it allowed humanity to expand across the continent of Thedas, growing in both numbers and power. In minus 1195 Ancient, growing human tribes in the north eventually united to form the Tevinter Imperium, Thedas' first major human nation. The magic users of the Imperium made peace with the dwarves, relying heavily on the lyrium they supplied. Their relationship with the neighbouring elves, however, was strained. As Tevinter started expanding and human towns and settlements began to encroach on elven territory, conflicts broke out. Unaware that the elven city of Alathan was hidden next to them, as the Imperium expanded eastward, settlers were met with hostility hostilities from strange magic-wielding creatures with pointed ears. Any human emissaries sent to make contact with their new neighbours never returned. Over the next few decades, tensions escalated, and in the summer of 998 Ancient, several human settlements built within the Al'athan Forest were attacked. In 981 Ancient, in retaliation, Imperial legions laid siege to the city of Al'athan. The conflict was long and bloody, lasting 6 years. Dalish accounts speak of Tevinter magisters using demons and dragon thralls in their attacks. Despite this, the elves chose to stay and fight, rather than fleeing the capital. A long drawn-out conflict cost the Imperium much in terms of resources and lives, and the then ruler of Tevinter, Archon Thalassian, under pressure to end the conflict swiftly in 795 Ancient, gave the order for Tevinter magisters to use blood magic to destroy the city at any cost. Together they unleashed a spell that sank the city of Al'athan into the ground, destroying the collected knowledge, history, art and culture of the Elven people. The few surviving elves who survived the devastation fled, but were soon captured by the Tevinter Imperium and enslaved. There was a small band of survivors who managed to find refuge in the nearby Cadhalash Tig, given sanctuary by the dwarves that lived there. However, this sanctuary did not last, as when the dwarves of Kalsharok learned of this, they destroyed the Tig to cover up any evidence that might jeopardize their alliance with Tevinter. Forced to live under Tevinter oppression, generations under the Imperium thumb all but killed Elven culture, language and history. All seemed lost for the Elven race until a potential saviour appeared in the form of Andraste and her Elven disciple Shartan. Andraste and her cult of the Maker rose to prominence following the First Blight between 395 and 203 Ancient. Andraste blamed Tevinter for the creation of the Darkspawn, corruption of the old gods, and the unleashing of the first archdemon. It was the hubris of 7 Tevinter magisters who used blood magic to enter the Fade physically, something that until then had never been done. They entered the gates of the Golden City, believed to be the former seat of the Maker and the realm of the old gods, depending on your religious views. The Golden City immediately turned black as soon as they arrived, and the mages were cast back into Thedas as the first Darkspawn, triggering the First Blight. Blaming Tevinter for the Blight and believing that they had been corrupted by the old gods' magic and their own hubris, Andraste led a successful war against the Imperium, forcing the Empire to pull back its borders. Led by a controversial Elven disciple called Shartan, many enslaved elves of Tevinter saw this as an opportunity and rose up in rebellion to aid Andraste's cause. In 165 Ancient, these elves, as a reward for their service against Tevinter, were given their freedom and awarded the Dales, a land in southern Orlais, and a new capital city called Halam Shiral, where they could live in peace and rebuild their civilization, reconnecting with their history, language and culture without fear of punishment. In the Dales, the elves tried to rebuild their culture bit by bit. They started by worshipping their pantheon of lost gods. I will talk more about these gods later on in this video, as they will be pretty crucial to Valeguard. One major issue these elves faced, though, was that after centuries of oppression by Tevinter, much of their knowledge about the old ways was gone and had passed down from generation to generation, told in hushed whispers to become a thing of legend and myth. Even some of their old gods' names were forgotten to time, and much of what they practiced was a mixture of general details they could remember, as well as new beliefs adopted to fill in the blanks. As such, much of the tales told by Dalish keepers should be taken with a pinch of salt, seen as interesting stories and myth rather than actual historical fact. Andraste and her husband Maferath kept their promise, and for 275 years the elves lived in relative peace and isolation. After Andraste was betrayed by her husband, executed, and became a martyr, with her teachings continuing through the Chantry of Light, the Chantry, which had grown massively in size and power in Orlais, became frustrated by their elvish neighbours who refused to convert to the cult of the Maker and continued to practice and worship their old pagan gods. Tensions with their human neighbours continued to escalate, with frequent border skirmishes occurring. The Elves responded by founding a legion known as the Emerald Knights to protect their land from human intrusion. Tensions worsened, and in 2-9 Glory, when a small Elven raiding party attacked the Elysian town of Red Crossing before marching on to Val Ryo, the capital of Orlais, under pressure from an angry Thedas population at these brazen attacks, Divine Renata I, the elected leader of the Chantry, called for a holy war against the Elves. This became known as the Exalted March of the Dales. In a series of brutal battles over the span of 10 years, they crushed the Elves and conquered the Dales, uprooting many of the Elven settlements there, including the capital of Halam Shiral. The surviving Elves were kicked out of the Dales and split apart. Some became wanderers, known as the Dalish, travelling in groups and never staying in one place too long. Steering clear of human settlements and cities, they stubbornly clung to their barely remembered traditions and fought to keep Elven culture, its history and language alive. Other elves that rejected the nomadic life of the Dalish chose instead to accept their fate and bitterly resigned themselves to a life lived as second-class citizens, servants, and labourers, now living among humankind as city elves, segregated into ghettos known as alienages. These alienages were segregated sections of a human community, reserved exclusively for the elven population of a city. They were often walled off from the other quarters. This was done as a preventative measure that would allow the city authorities to lock down the alienage should an uprising or rebellion occur. Sadly, these segregated areas of the city received no support from the main town in terms of infrastructure, city services, funding, or policing. As such, these areas were often plagued by poverty and crime, and the elven residents were frequently left to fend for themselves. While this segregation has allowed the elves a modicum of independence and social autonomy, it has also encouraged their isolation from human society and perpetuated their second-class status. In complete contrast to city elves, we have the Dalish, a nomadic breed of elves who openly refuse to live under human rule. They see themselves as the keepers of elven culture and history and dedicate themselves to gathering and preserving the scattered remnants of their lost culture. The Dalish live and travel in clans, often unwelcome in human cities, no doubt as the human authorities believe they will spark a rebellion among the city elves residing there. Dalish tend to stick to the forest and other wild places on the fringes of society. They prefer to never stay in one place too long. They travel in small bands which are often made up of blood relatives, each led by a wise elder known as the Keeper. The Dalish travel in ornately carved wagons known as aravel, drawn by large white stag-like creatures called hala, which are revered as sacred beasts. Originating in Alathan and bred in large numbers in the Dales, the hala served as mounts for the Emerald Knights. They are seen as the protectors of the elven race, blessed by their own gods. All adult Dalish have intricate tattoos on their faces. This intricate inkwork is known as valaslin, or blood writing. This tradition serves not only to identify the Dalish among their elven kin, but to demonstrate their commitment to the old ways. It is an extremely powerful symbolic gesture among Dalish. Most Dalish groups tend to keep to themselves. However, once every 10 years, clans meet to take part in Alafen, an event meaning for the love of the people. Lore keepers exchange stories and knowledge, while the old ways of the elves are celebrated, and the sad lessons of the destruction of both Alathan and the Dales are also recounted and discussed. During Alathen, the lawkeepers also recount tales of their people's great history and the pantheon of gods they worshipped. The eldest of the Dalish assembled a patchwork of what might have been. They had their own pantheon of gods who were said to bestow all life's gifts and dole out its punishments. According to Dalish law, the world was created by Mithal, goddess of motherhood, justice and protection, and elgar'nan, god of fatherhood and vengeance. Their eldest children are remembered as twin brothers Falandin, who was friend to the dead and guided elders on their journey of enlightenment in their long sleep and later carried them beyond the veil into death. His brother Durthaman gave the gift of knowledge and taught ancient elves the value of loyalty and faith in family. There was also the daughter Andruil, goddess of the hunt, who watched over the animals and taught the elves to respect nature. Andruil's godly sister Silaise, the hearthkeeper, stayed home to sing and make art. She is credited with teaching the elves to use fire, heal with herbs, and spin fibers to make threads and rope. Their brother June, the god of craft, used Silaise's lessons to teach the elves to fashion bows for hunting Andruil's gifts. Andruil's influence was so far-reaching that she had many followers, including Ghilan'nain, an elf chosen by Andruil to rise to godhood. She was known as the Mother of the Hala for her devotion to the animals. According to Dalish tales, these ancient gods were betrayed. They tell of an ancient conflict during the reign of the Elven gods, where the pantheon led by Mithal and elgar'nan warred endlessly with gods of terror, malice, spite, and pestilence, known as the Forgotten Ones. In between both sides stood Fen'Harel, a godly trickster called the Dreadwolf, who walked as kin among the pantheon, but was also regarded by the Forgotten Ones as one of their own. The Dalish believe that Fen'Harel conspired to lock away both good and evil gods to have Elvenon and the Beyond, their word for the Fade, to himself. It is said that he promised a truce between the Elven gods and the Forgotten Ones and then betrayed them both, sealing the gods away in their respective realms. They believe he imprisoned the Elven pantheon away in the Eternal City at the heart of the Beyond, and now prowls the Beyond, feasting upon the souls of the dead. The loss of their gods was crushing and left the elves to fend for themselves. This was the reason the all-powerful Elven pantheon did not come to their rescue when humanity first arrived and eventually sacked the ancient city of Alathen. These are, of course, the tales told by the Dalish, who revered the Evanuris, or elven gods, as benevolent beings. According to Solas's recountings during the Inquisition, and especially during the Trespasser DLC, the truth behind the Evanuris was very different. According to Solas, the Evanuris were not born with godlike status. Instead, they started out as generals during a war. They were extremely powerful elven mages who earned the respect of their elders and attained godlike status to their people through their incredible feats of strength and power. This power sadly corrupted them, and according to Solas, the Evanuris were tyrannical. Just like Tevinter, they had their own institution of slavery, and Valaslin was actually used as slave markings, each symbolizing one of the Evanuris to whom their master served. Solas hated Valaslin and personally removed these markings during his rebellion against the Evanuris. During the Trespasser DLC, we learn a lot more about each of the elven gods. Ghilan'nain, for example, was known for making monsters, which Andruil loved to hunt, alongside animals and even people. During the quest What Pride Had Roared, Solas even mentions that Falandin was a vain being who killed anyone who would not bow to him, and there are even some obscure accounts of elgar'nan driving the dwarves underground. While Solas hated the way in which the Evanuris treated and subjugated his own people, what actually prompted him to stage a rebellion was Mithal. According to Solas, Mithal, unlike the other Evanuris, was actually compassionate and kind. She repeatedly interfered with the other gods and their petty squabbles and vengeful natures, and unable to abide by her constant challenge to their power and position, they murdered her for it. Flemeth herself actually compared the murder to a betrayal, perhaps implying that it was Mithal's own lover Elgar'nan who killed her. There are also theories that Solas was in love with Mithal, or that the two were secret lovers, given his reaction to her death. According to Solas, he created the veil solely to imprison the Evanuris, and he saw this as a way to free the elves from their tyrannical rule and avenge Mithal. The elven belief that it was the humans' appearance that ended their immortality is false, and that elves lost their magic and immortality due to Solas's creating the veil to keep the Evanuris in the Fade. This was an unforeseen consequence that Solas feels a huge sense of guilt for, and is a wrong that he is trying to undo by tearing down the veil in Dragon Age the Veilguard. While we do not know if we will see or interact with any of the other Evanuris in Veilguard, we do know that Elgar'nan and ghilan'nain will feature prominently, and it has been confirmed that they are blighted. What we know for sure is their hatred of Solas is strong and very personal, and we will definitely learn more about the dreadwolf, the Fade, and the Evanuris as we play through the game, which I am extremely excited to learn about. So that is pretty much everything that you need to know about the elves going into Dragon Age the Veilguard. I hope you found the video helpful and informative. If you want to learn more about the events of Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, check these two videos out here. I will be back again with more Dragon Age content over the coming months, though you will have to be patient with me as these videos take a while to make, but hopefully they're worth the wait. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you all have a great week. Take care, everyone, and as always, happy gaming. I should go.